The lawyer's voice carried an unnatural echo in the widow's parlor, as if the walls themselves were uneasy about what they were about to hear. The room had been arranged to impress. Antique furniture polished to a mirror sheen, oil portraits of grim-faced ancestors watching from their gilded frames, a crystal chandelier hanging low enough to catch the afternoon light and fracture it into sharp, glittering shards. Outside, winter pressed its gray face against the tall windows, but inside everything was warm, sealed, controlled. Eleanor Blackwood sat at the center of it all, straight-backed in her chair, hands folded in her lap like porcelain figurines carefully placed for display. Her black dress was severe and immaculate, mourning-worn as both armor and performance. She did not cry. She had not cried at the funeral either. Those who noticed whispered that she was strong. Those who knew her better knew she simply never allowed herself to appear weak. Around her sat distant cousins, a nephew she had met only twice, an aunt by marriage whose smile never reached her eyes. They waited with thinly disguised impatience, the way people did when they believed something valuable was about to be handed to them. Their gazes flicked from the lawyer's briefcase to the furniture, to the widow herself, silently dividing what they believed would soon be theirs. At the far edge of the room, near the doorway, stood Clara. She had chosen that place instinctively, the same way she always did, close enough to be useful, far enough to be ignored. Her uniform was simple, clean but faded from countless washings. Her dark hair was pinned back tightly, not a strand daring to escape. She kept her eyes lowered, though her attention was sharp, alert, trained by years of listening without seeming to listen. Clara had served in the Blackwood house for 6 years. In that time, she had learned the rhythms of the place, which floorboards creaked, which doors must never be opened without permission, which questions were dangerous even to think. She knew Eleanor's moods by the sound of her footsteps and could tell whether the widow was lying by the way her voice softened at the end of a sentence. And she knew the house had a heartbeat. It pulsed faintly beneath the floors, below the carpets and the heavy silence. The basement. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and unfolded the document with deliberate care. "We are gathered," he began, "to read the last will and testament of Mr. Harold Blackwood." At the mention of the name, Eleanor inclined her head slightly, as if accepting condolences from an invisible audience. Clara noticed how her fingers tightened just a little more, the knuckles paling against the black fabric. The lawyer spoke of assets, of accounts, of properties in cities Clara had only heard of on the radio. Each sentence landed with a soft, satisfied rustle among the relatives. Someone cleared their throat eagerly. Someone else smiled. Clara's attention drifted, unbidden, toward the hallway beyond the parlor. The basement door was barely visible from where she stood, half hidden behind a tall cabinet. It looked no different than it ever had, dark, solid, locked. And yet, Clara felt it then, the way she sometimes did late at night while scrubbing floors or carrying laundry past that corridor. A sound, so faint she might have imagined it if she hadn't heard it before. A dull scrape, metal against stone, followed by a pause that felt like someone holding their breath. Her heart began to pound. "As stipulated," the lawyer continued, "the entirety of the Blackwood estate is bequeathed to my client, Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood." A murmur rose immediately. Approval. Relief. Disappointment from those who had hoped for more. Eleanor allowed herself a restrained smile, the kind that suggested dignity rather than triumph. Clara swallowed. She told herself she was mistaken. Old houses made noises. Pipes knocked. Wood shifted. That was what Eleanor had said the first time Clara had asked, her tone sharp enough to end the conversation forever. The lawyer raised a finger. "There is, however, a condition attached to this inheritance." The murmur died. Eleanor's smile froze, like a crack spreading through glass. "A condition," she repeated, too quickly. "Yes," the lawyer said, peering down at the page. "The beneficiary is required to ensure the lifelong care and protection of the testator's dependent." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and wrong. "There must be some mistake," Eleanor said. She rose from her chair with controlled precision, but her face had lost its color. "My husband had no dependents." Clara heard it again then. 3 sharp taps. Not random. Not accidental. Knocks. Her breath caught painfully in her chest. She knew that rhythm. She had heard it in the dead of night when the house slept, when the silence was so deep it rang. She had heard it while standing alone in the kitchen, hands submerged in soapy water, praying she was wrong. The lawyer hesitated. "The language here is quite specific," he said. "It refers to, there is no one," Eleanor snapped, her voice slicing through his words. She turned sharply, her gaze landing on Clara as if drawn there by instinct. "Why are you standing there?" Get out. You're dismissed. Every instinct Clara possessed screamed at her to obey. To lower her head, to step back, to disappear. That was what maids did. That was how they survived. But the sound came again, weaker this time, followed by something that might have been a cough. Clara felt the years of silence press against her ribs until it hurt. She thought of the meals she had secretly taken to the basement door, leaving them on the floor until Eleanor caught her and threw the tray against the wall. She thought of the nights she had lain awake, counting the hours between the sounds, fearing the day they would stop altogether. I'm sorry, Clara said. The words were small, but they seemed to echo louder than the lawyer's voice had. Heads turned. Eleanor stared at her as if she were something newly discovered and deeply unpleasant. What did you say? The widow demanded. Clara lifted her chin. Her hands shook, but she kept them still. There is a dependent, she said. He's alive. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Eleanor laughed, a short, brittle sound that cracked halfway through. You insolent girl, she said. You don't know what you're talking about. Clara took a step forward. She was aware of every eye on her now, aware that whatever she did next could not be undone. Sir, she said, addressing the lawyer directly, the person your document refers to is in this house. Eleanor surged toward her. Enough, she cried. I will not have my servant spreading lies in front of my family. Get out. Another knock sounded, louder this time, desperate. The color drained completely from Eleanor's face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The lawyer slowly closed his folder. Mrs. Blackwood, he said, his voice very quiet, perhaps we should investigate. Clara felt something loosen inside her chest, not relief, not yet, but the first fragile crack in a wall that had stood far too long. The first blow against the basement door came from one of the younger cousins, his shoulder slamming into the wood with more force than grace. The door shuddered but held, its old lock groaning like something half alive. Eleanor screamed for them to stop, her voice shrill and breaking as she clawed at the lawyer's sleeve, but no one listened. The house itself seemed to lean in, holding its breath, as if it had waited years for this moment. On the third impact, the lock gave way with a sharp crack. The door swung inward, releasing a breath of air so cold and stale it felt like it belonged to another season entirely. The smell hit them next, damp stone, rusted iron, and something human beneath it, something that made more than one person gag and turn away. Clara stepped forward before anyone else could stop her. Her hands were trembling, but her feet carried her with a strange certainty, as if she had been walking toward this door for years without realizing it. The narrow staircase descended into darkness, the steps uneven and slick with age. She took the lantern from the wall hook, struck the match, and watched the flame bloom, fragile but determined. Each step downward felt heavier than the last. The air grew colder, pressing against her skin, seeping through the thin fabric of her uniform. Behind her, she could hear hesitant footsteps, whispers, the lawyer murmuring something under his breath. Eleanor's sobs echoed faintly from above, high and unraveling. At the bottom of the stairs, the lantern light spread outward, revealing stone walls mottled with moisture. Water dripped steadily from a pipe overhead, the sound rhythmic and cruel. Chains lay coiled near the wall, thick and rusted, their purpose unmistakable. Clara's throat tightened as she lifted the lantern higher. In the far corner of the room, something moved. At first, it was only a shadow shifting against the wall. Then the shape resolved into a person, thin to the point of sharpness, shoulders hunched, hands gripping the edge of a narrow cot as if it were the only solid thing in the world. His hair was too long, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame, as though they belonged to someone else entirely. Thomas, Clara whispered, the name escaping her before she realized she had spoken. He flinched at the sound of her voice, shrinking back instinctively, his eyes wide and unfocused in the sudden light. They were dark eyes, startlingly alive in a face that had learned to expect pain. He blinked several times, lifting one hand to shield himself from the lantern's glow. It's all right, Clara said softly, lowering the light. She took a cautious step forward, afraid that if she moved too quickly he would vanish like smoke. You're not in trouble. You're not alone. Behind her, someone swore quietly. The lawyer inhaled sharply, the sound catching in his chest as if he could not quite believe what he was seeing. One of the relatives backed away up the stairs, hand pressed to her mouth. Thomas tried to stand. His legs trembled violently, betraying him, and he collapsed back onto the cot with a small, broken sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Clara crossed the remaining distance and knelt beside him without thinking. The stone floor was icy beneath her knees, but she barely noticed. I'm here, she said again, this time taking his hand. His skin was cold, his fingers thin as twigs, but when he felt her touch, he clung to her with surprising strength, as if afraid she might disappear. The lawyer cleared his throat. Who is he? He asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. Clara looked up. Her fear was still there, coiled tightly in her stomach, but beneath it was something stronger now. His name is Thomas Blackwood, she said. He's Mrs. Blackwood's son. The words fell into the room like stones dropped into deep water. No, Eleanor cried from the top of the stairs. That's a lie. She's lying. Clara stood slowly, careful not to let go of Thomas's hand. He was born before Mrs. Blackwood married Mr. Harold Blackwood, she continued. She kept him hidden. Said he was sick, said no one could ever know. When her husband's health began to fail, she locked him down here. The lawyer's face hardened, the shock giving way to something colder. He stepped closer, examining the chains, the cot, the room itself as if committing it all to memory. The will, he said quietly, almost to himself. The dependent. Thomas looked up at that, his brow furrowing. Father, he whispered, the word rough and unused. Eleanor's sobs turned into something raw and animal. She staggered down the steps, clutching the railing as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. I did what I had to do, she cried. He would have ruined everything. Harold could never know. I protected him. I protected us. You imprisoned him, the lawyer said, his voice sharp. In conditions that are unconscionable. Thomas shrank back as Eleanor approached, fear overtaking confusion. Clara instinctively stepped between them, her body a shield. For a moment, Eleanor looked at her with pure hatred, then something like defeat. I fed him, Eleanor whispered weakly. I kept him alive. You hid him, Clara said, her voice shaking now. You erased him. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Somewhere above them, a door slammed as another relative fled the house entirely. The lawyer straightened. According to the will, he said, his voice formal again, as if clinging to procedure was the only way to remain steady, if the dependent is alive, the estate is to be placed in trust for him. Mrs. Blackwood is to have no control over it. Eleanor sank onto the step, her strength finally gone. Her carefully constructed world lay in ruins around her, exposed to the light she had fought so hard to keep out. Thomas's grip on Clara's hand tightened. I don't understand, he murmured. Am I free? Clara swallowed hard, fighting back tears. Yes, she said. You are. The sound of sirens began to rise in the distance, faint at first, then growing louder, inevitable. The lawyer nodded once, grimly. I've already sent for the authorities, he said. And for a doctor. Clara helped Thomas to his feet, supporting his weight as best she could. He leaned into her, tentative but trusting, like someone learning how to stand in the world for the first time. As they ascended the stairs together, the lantern casting their shadows long and tall against the walls, Clara felt the house release its breath. The basement was no longer a secret. And neither was the boy who had been buried alive within it.